What is the most unbelievable fact you have ever heard of? Story 1. The most amazing fact I heard this week is that Saturn's moon Titan has riverine valleys like Earth, except they are formed by flowing liquid methane. Of course, it also rains methane, but the drops are twice as large as rain on Earth and fall at a fifth of the speed. It also has volcanoes that spew a magma that is water and ammonia, and at minus 100 degrees Celsius has the same viscosity as molten rock. While a foreign exchange intern in a U.S. university research lab, we worked on a design competition organized by NASA. The goal was to design a VTOL UAV, vertical takeoff and landing unmanned autonomous vehicle, that would explore the surface of Titan. It was a really fun exercise, and while the lab was mostly used to handle flight dynamics, this was rather close to designing a submarine because of the thickness of the atmosphere. We ended up with a circular wing design that would also serve as a buoy for when the vehicle would land on a lake of methane. NASA awarded us the first place. Don't think this will ever make it to Titan, but that's still better than nothing. Story 2. In the absence of aerodynamic downforce generated by giant spoilers, Formula One cars have sufficient power to fly above 150 km per hour. They frequently race at well over 250. That's why the spoilers on an F1 car are designed such that at 150 km per hour, the car generates enough downforce that if you flipped it upside down and stuck it on the ceiling, it could keep on driving upside down. At average racing speeds, the amount of downforce generated by an F1 car's spoilers is roughly equal to 3 times the car's own weight. In the old days when cars didn't have spoilers, it wasn't an uncommon occurrence for F1 cars to lift off from the ground, and in more dire cases, flip over and kill the driver. This downforce naturally increases the faster an F1 car goes. With more downforce comes more friction or grip on the tires. Because of this, F1 drivers have to turn corners at very, very, very high speeds. Otherwise, the car spins out due to not having enough traction. In fact, the cornering speeds are so high that F1 drivers perform neck strengthening workout routines to be able to deal with the associated G-forces. The most ridiculous thing about all of this? With 2.4-liter V8 engines, the current F1 is restricted to a smaller engine displacement than the many consumer vehicles, and it's set to go even smaller in 2014 with new regulations limiting them to 1.6-liter turbocharged V6 engines. Story 3. The bacteria inside your body takes on an evolutionary path that is specific to you and contains species that are different from anyone else's bacteria, as well as the fact that there are, on average, more bacteria housed in your body than people in the world. To top that off, if anything bad happens to your own intestinal bacteria, like they all die off due to an autoimmune disease, doctors have devised a way of rebooting that intestinal bacteria by taking fecal matter from a healthy person and inserting it into your large intestine. It's still a developing treatment, but it's been proven to be highly effective in treating people who've had horrible C. diff infections, as well as people with colitis and irritable bowel syndrome. And there will soon be studies into its effectiveness in treating a number of neurological diseases theorized to be caused by leaky gut. Story 4. Despite once being one of the great industrial cities the world has ever seen, Detroit is now basically a dystopia. In the 1950 census, Detroit's population was 1.8 million people. As of the 2010 census, the population was just over 700,000. Thousands of empty homes, apartment buildings, and commercial buildings around the city are vacant and decaying. More than half of the owners of Detroit's 305,000 properties failed to pay their 2011 tax bills. Nearly half of Detroit's functional adults are illiterate. The list goes on. I'm about to graduate from Wayne State University in Detroit in a week, and Detroit is going through a complete corporate and government makeover, starting in the heart of downtown and midtown and expanding out. The suburbs of Detroit are more like what you're talking about, but pretty much every major city's suburbs are a place where projects, low-income housing, and abandoned buildings are found. The center of the city is actually doing very well and is only getting better. Story 5. All of our school textbooks show the solar system, with the planets close enough that usually the artist shows a shadow from one planet to the next. In actuality, if you were to draw the solar system to scale and the Earth was the size of a pea on paper, Jupiter would be over 300 meters away and Pluto would be 2.5 kilometers away. The nearest star would be 16,000 kilometers away on paper. The universe is huge. This comes from a great book, I listened to the audiobook, by Bill Bryson titled A Short History on Nearly Everything. I listened to it probably a decade ago, and many facts from that book have always stuck with me. Story 6. That oxygen is essential to our own life, yet slowly killing us. Explanation. Well, the body uses oxygen at the end of a long chain that produces ATP, the energy source that drives reactions in the entire body. This process converts oxygen to water. However, the reaction of oxygen to water requires 4 electrons. Oxygen is a very strong oxidizing agent, meaning it wants to gain electrons. And when it only gains 1 or 2 electrons, it forms very reactive molecules called ROCs, or radicals. These molecules then go on to react with things in the cell that they shouldn't, causing damage to things such as DNA. There is a strong link to the formation of these ROSs to aging, meaning that over time, these complexes cause more and more damage, or the human body has more trouble disposing of them more and more until more and more cells die and eventually we die. I may have some details wrong, so feel free to correct me. This is why oxygen bars are really stupid, and anyone who goes to them is just speeding up your own death. Story 7. That when wood evolved, there was nothing that had yet evolved to break down the tough cell walls that these newfangled trees had come up with to support themselves. As a consequence, hundreds of thousands of years passed, with trees dying and nothing being able to decompose them, until fungi finally adapted to dissolve that outer shell. The resultant enormous buildup of dead wood, along with atmospheric oxygen levels well above today 20-something percent, triggered, of course, worldwide fires that lasted decades, choking the Earth's air with smoke and driving it headlong into an ice age. Story 8. There's 1 you, 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, onwards back in time, doubling at each generation. Go back something like 800 years, and your family tree at that one generation in time would have roughly 1 billion places. Back another generation, say 825 years ago, 2 billion, 850 years ago, 4 billion. Also now consider that the majority of your ancestors in this time period will have come from a very small geographic area. If you've got European ancestry, you can also consider the Black Death in the 1340s, which supposedly wiped out a third of Europe's population. Take as an example 2 people with British ancestry. No matter how far apart they live, they're almost certainly related at some point in the past 400 years. Check it out online by reading up on the ancestor problem. Don't hold me to the exact numbers. It all varies because generations aren't really 25 years apart, and probably much shorter the further you go back. This was all roughly remembered off the top of my head. The mind-blowing still exists. Story 9. That blue glow a nuclear reactor makes, that makes it to the front page every few weeks or so. That happens when electrons travel faster than light in water, resulting in what can be conventionally thought of as a sonic boom for light. Not even the coolest thing about it. Similarly, electrons can produce this blue glow when they travel through the vitreous humor in your eyeballs. 1, 2, 3. It is said that some people who have been involved in criticality accidents knew they would die from radiation exposure after seeing a massive blue flash in their eyes. This might also be the mechanism behind how astronauts see occasional flashes of light in their eyes when they are in space. When heavy cosmic particles hit astronauts' eyes, they can produce electrons of sufficient energy to produce the blue glow, which astronauts see. For the really fascinating, just imagine the insanely infinitesimal probability involved in this occurrence. A lead ion hurtles through space for eons at near light speed, although it may only seem like a few seconds to the ion, just to hit that tiny target of an astronaut's eye, producing light that the astronaut can see. What an insane chain of events involving statistics, astronomy, nuclear physics, biology, and neurology. Story 10. Consider the fact that for 3.8 billion years, a period of time older than the Earth's mountains and rivers and oceans, every one of your forebears on both sides has been attractive enough to find a mate, healthy enough to reproduce, and sufficiently blessed by fate and circumstances to live long enough to do so. Not one of your pertinent ancestors was squashed, devoured, drowned, starved, stranded, stuck fast, untimely wounded, or otherwise deflected from its life's quest of delivering a tiny charge of genetic material to the right partner at the right moment in order to perpetuate the only possible sequence of hereditary combinations that could result, eventually, astoundingly and all too briefly, in you, from a short history of nearly everything. Bill Bryson, Story 11. The Hubble Deep Field is only one of 24th millionth of the sky. There are 3,000 identified galaxies in the image. That means there were about 3,024 million galaxies in the universe 13 billion years ago. Think of all the life that exists in all of those. Our species has been knowledgeable of itself for about 10,000 years. How many civilizations have risen and fallen in these galaxies? Look at the picture of the deep field. Imagine them all there, all going about their business just like you are. Someday a telescope on a faraway planet will image our galaxy, and the life there will think about the same things we are, about what intelligent life exists in their small image of the universe. Story 12. The rabies virus infects through saliva transmission of a bite. From there, it travels in retrograde motion up the central nervous system, where it infects the limbic system of the infected animal. This brain center affects emotions, in humans at least, and behavior. The infection turns the infected animal rabid, aggressive, unpredictable. Another side effect is that the infected animal begins to have lots of frothy saliva, shedding billions of viruses. This mechanism of infection is perfect for the virus's continued survival. Aggressive animal, slobbering lots of saliva, prone to bite others. This goes on for a few days before the animal succumbs. There has only been one documented human survivor of rabies. Story 13. Not really a fact, but a really good theory. It's an evolutionary process that your hands and feet prune up like raisins when wet. It is commonly said that they just get wet and absorb the water, but why doesn't this work for people with destroyed nerve endings? Mark Changizi, PhD at 2AI, describes it as an evolutionary process that us primates took up to retain our grip after getting wet. This would make it easier to grip trees for climbing. It is undisputed that after being wet, we can still grip objects from creating channels the water can flow through like the treads of a tire. Story 14. In New York, specifically in NYC where I live, when you're taking the test to gain your driver's permit, one of the questions I believe that is still on the exam, haven't taken mine yet, is if there is a stop sign at a four-way intersection and a cop car with its sirens on is racing down towards the intersection, a fire truck also blasting full speed to an emergency is coming from another direction, an ambulance rushing to an emergency from another direction, and a mail truck is coming from the last direction. Who has the right of way? Naturally, anyone would say an ambulance or fire truck due to the life-altering circumstances that they involve themselves in. Even the police responding to whatever may be the case. Nope, the ambulance, fire truck, and cops all have to stop at the stop sign to allow the mailman to go and proceed with his federal duties. Story 15. Two facts. The old fact that you eat 10 spiders in your sleep was actually made up by a woman years ago and inserted into a list of real facts. She was hoping to see who would catch the mistake. If you've ever heard of this one, then you know that everyone believed it. The number of bastards, both in the world and in your family tree, is staggering. I once read that a hospital in New York City randomly checked genetic data of kids born in the hospital to the parents and found that 1 in 10 of the guys who thought they were the father weren't. My favorite part was that this was in line with what the hospital expected to see. Extrapolating from that, you can also expect that this means that 1 in 5 women trying to have a kid is using multiple sperm donors. Figure that half the time, the husband-dad actually wins in the sperm war and impregnates the woman. The other half, he doesn't. Story 16. Every time you sufficiently shuffle a deck of playing cards to randomize the order, you have created a sequence of cards that has never before occurred in the history of the universe, anywhere in any deck. There are so many permutations of card sequences that the odds of you repeating a previously randomly shuffled sequence are essentially zero, even if you had started shuffling your deck 1,000 times per second since the beginning of the universe. Story 17. Two related ones that are kind of the same one, really. The observable universe you can see with your naked eye is something like tens or hundreds of thousands of stars. However, it barely extends much of a distance at all. Someone will have the distance out there. I think it's only 5,000 light years, but I could be wrong. And the Milky Way is 120,000 light years across. And there could be between 200 and 400 billion stars in the galaxy. Many of these could have more than one planet. There are then over 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe of 13.7 billion years. Because space grew faster than light, there could be even more objects outside our observational limit, and thus even more galaxies. It could go on forever. And we're here sitting on a rock flying through space. Story 18. President Nixon tried to have a newspaper reporter murdered. White House plumbers G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt met with a CIA operative to discuss the possible ways to assassinate journalist Jack Anderson, including drugging him with LSD, poisoning his aspirin bottle, or staging a fatal mugging. They were arrested for the Watergate break-in before they could carry out Anderson's murder. Story 19. Eye color can determine how much alcohol a person can drink before it affects them. People with light eyes, blue, green, hazel, have a higher alcohol tolerance than people with dark eyes. This is because people with dark eyes are more sensitive to medication and other stimuli. P.S. For those who question this, a study was done by Georgia State University back in 2000 that compared the results between 10,860 male prison inmates and 1,862 women in a national survey. Story 20. Prepare to be dazzled. This parasite's life cycle is more mind-bending and chilling than an M. Night Shyamalan film. Leucochloridium paradoxum are a type of fluke, aka a parasitic flatworm, that prey on birds. A fascinating turn of events, considering they begin their lives as eggs in bird droppings. Thus, the problem facing the baby Leucochloridium paradoxum is, how do I get myself back into one of those feathery things? Taking a page from Greek history, the infant flatworms rely on Trojan trickery. First, they hang out in the droppings until a snail happens along and eats the bird dung. Then they initiate their devious plan of action by taking up residence in the snail's eye stalks. Sure, it sounds slimy and gross to us, but after a childhood spent living in bird feces, it's a step up. As they mature, the flukes become visible through the snail's translucent skin. And that's when things really get interesting. To a bird, this fluke-filled eye stalk looks like a caterpillar. So the bird devours the stalk and ends up with a bellyful of Leucochloridium paradoxum that will, of course, lay eggs and begin the cycle again. Meanwhile, the snail shakes its head, shops for an eye patch, and vows never to eat feces again. Story 21. There's a type of fish, the bluehead wrasse, that lives in clans with multiple females and one male. When the one male dies, the oldest female undergoes gender reversal and begins producing sperm instead of eggs. There's also a group of lizards that are all females, but during courtship, one female will act male-like, and then they alternate roles depending on hormone levels. They don't need to do this, but it helps them lay more eggs. So it's basically a colony of lesbian lizards. This is why I've never understood the homosexuality is unnatural argument. Story 22. There are more. If the nucleus of an atom was on the center spot of a football pitch, the average position of the electrons would be in the spectator stands. If the sun was the size of a beach ball, the Earth would be the size of the pea at the other end of a 100-meter sprint track. If you breathed on a cold metal sphere the size of an apple, the condensation would be relatively thicker than that of the oceans and the atmosphere on Earth. Story 23. Mushroom spores are practically custom-built to survive in the environment of space. Assuming spores are capable of being pushed into outer space by electrostatic forces, a mushroom species could potentially colonize the habitable planets of the galaxy in around 40 million years. Given that mushrooms are non-invasive and occupy the very bottom of the food chain, since they primarily survive on decomposing organic matter, their survivability among alien worlds is very high. It's like they're magic mushrooms. Story 24. Voyager 1 is a spacecraft that was launched by NASA on the 5th of September 1977. It is the furthest man-made object from Earth at approximately 11 billion miles away. The signal from it takes roughly 17 hours to reach us. It is believed that it is currently traveling through a magnetic highway called the heliosphere, where interstellar magnetic field lines are interacting with the sun's, allowing particles from inside the heliosphere to zoom out into interstellar space and for interstellar particles to fly in. Story 25. I've got a couple unbelievable and random facts I've learned over the past couple years. Some of you may already know some of these. 1. If you are struck by lightning, your skin will be heated to 28,000 degrees centigrade, hotter than the surface of the sun. 2. Cockroaches can live 9 days without their heads before they starve to death. 3. Many babies are on average 200 grams heavier than babies born in other months. 4. Business.com is currently the most expensive domain name sold for $7.5 million. Story 26. Don't know that I'd call this a fact, but here goes. You are really more like a wave than a particle, more energy than mass. The vast majority of cells in your body will be replaced, most in fact, many, many, many times over. Only a small collection of the mass that you were born with will stay with you until you die. The rest is accumulated and sloughed off over the course of your life. What you really are is the motion and interaction of that changing mass as you navigate the world, like a wave that forms in the middle of the ocean, traverses thousands of miles, and crashes on a beach. Like you, it's not the water that does the traveling, just the energy. Story 27. The scientific advancement of the human race in the past approximately 350 years. We went from nothing to the Curiosity rover, quantum mechanics, and now there are ways to photograph an individual molecule. We have determined through experimentation that we live in a quantized universe, and we can understand what that means. Bionic eyeballs are being developed for the blind. Laser cannons are shooting down fighter jets. We can even figure out how old anything in the world is by measuring the ratio of slightly heavier particles to slightly lighter particles in a substance. And it is accurate. All of this in just approximately 350 years. I'm starting with Newton. Approximately 1 in 5,000th of the existence of humanity, or approximately 1 in 10 millionth of the existence of life on our planet. Story 28. Infinity. I know it's old, but it is unbelievable. Think about it. Never ending. If the universe was not infinite, it would just be nothing. But nothing is something. If you if you think of it as an atom's composition, no matter how small it gets, it has to be made of something, right? Just blows my mind every time I think about it in depth. Nothing is only something in a contextual manner. Nothingness is an absence of being, not a void. Nothingness, or the concept of a zero, is not a place, but a point of origin. Zero is a concept with an absence of math. But since our brains are wired for greater than and less than valuing, we can never truly understand it. There is a wall between the positive and negative that doesn't exist, yet does. It's a paradox. Story 29. The Vikings held a permanent settlement on Greenland for over 500 years. That's longer than North America has been settled by the Europeans. Furthermore, the Vikings made several attempts to colonize the mainland, but were killed off each time by the mass amounts of Native Americans. The only reason the Europeans were able to settle the East Coast was because during the prior winter, a virus swept through, killing roughly 90% of the natives. Story 30. Not really a fact, but the Fermi paradox blows my mind. Per Wiki, the Fermi paradox is the apparent contradiction between high estimates of the probability of the existence of extraterrestrial civilization and humanity's lack of contact with, or evidence for, such. The basic points of the argument, made by physicists Enrico Fermi and Michael H. Hart, are: the sun is a young star. There are billions of stars in the galaxy that are billions of years older. Some of these stars likely have Earth-like planets which, if the Earth is typical, may develop intelligent life. Presumably, some of these civilizations will develop interstellar travel, a technology Earth is investigating even now. At any practical pace of interstellar travel, the galaxy can be completely colonized in a few tens of millions of years. According to this line of thinking, the Earth should have already been colonized, or at least visited. But no convincing evidence of this exists. Furthermore, no confirmed signs of intelligence elsewhere have been spotted, either in our galaxy or the more than 80 billion other galaxies of the observable universe. Hence Fermi's question, where is everybody?